Okay, I'm ready to get into the details now. We talked about what TOD is, but how does this Romanian guide suggest actually making it happen? What are the steps?
Well, it's a multi-pronged approach.
Yeah.
One key thing is changing how we see train stations. Instead of just being places you pass through, they could be destinations themselves.
I love that idea. How do we make that happen?
Think about adding things like shops, restaurants, cafes, maybe even cultural venues or co-working spaces, either in the station or right around it.
Okay.
The guide even mentions stations with libraries, art galleries, farmers markets. It's really cool.
So instead of rushing through, people might actually want to hang out there.
Exactly. And it's not just what's inside, it's the area around it, too.
Yeah.
Think plazas, parks, green spaces, places people want to be, even if they're not traveling.
That makes so much sense. It's about making the station part of the city, like a community center. But what about housing? That seems important, especially in crowded cities.
You're right. The guide really emphasizes housing, especially affordable and mixed income options near these transportation hubs.
Because if you live close and have everything you need, you don't need a car as much.
Exactly. It's better for traffic and for the environment.
Definitely. But what about those old rail lines themselves? Can we do anything with them?
Absolutely. This is where it gets really interesting. The guide talks about turning them into greenways, bike paths, walkways, even those long, narrow parks.
Right.
Remember Helsinki's Banana project? It's a perfect example of taking something old and making it valuable again.
It's like giving the city room to breathe. And I bet those green spaces are great for those areas.
They are. They're not just pretty, they make it safer and more enjoyable to walk or bike so people are less likely to use cars. It's about designing a city for people.
This is all sounding really good. We've got these lively station areas, parks, housing, and green paths connecting it all.
Yeah.
But I'm guessing this takes a lot of planning to pull off.
You're absolutely right. And that's why the guide stresses the need for a strategy, a big picture approach. It's not about individual projects here and there. It's about a vision for how everything works together.
Like a puzzle, where each piece has to fit just right.
Exactly. And just like a puzzle, you need someone to make sure all those pieces are coming together the right way.
So who's in charge of making these projects happen?
The guide is clear about this. It has to be a team effort. Local governments, transportation people, developers, and very importantly, the community itself.
Because in the end, they're the ones who will be living there.
Exactly. And the guide really emphasizes how important public input is. People need to be part of the process. They need to understand what's happening, see the benefits, and feel heard.
It's about trust and ownership, not just telling people what's going to happen, but making them part of the solution.
100%. But let's be real. These projects sound expensive. Can Romanian cities afford this?
That's a good question. There's always that practical side.
Right. The guide acknowledges that funding is a challenge. These things take money.
Of course.
But it's not impossible. It suggests looking at different options like public-private partnerships, grants, even things like crowdfunding.
So getting creative with funding.
Exactly. The key is to make people believe in the project. Show them it's a good investment, not just for profit, but for the community and the environment too.
Now, we've talked a lot about the good stuff, but what about the challenges? The guide must address those too, right?
It wouldn't be very helpful if it didn't. One of the biggest challenges it talks about is how complicated it can be to coordinate these big projects.
That makes sense. So many people involved, different goals, timelines, budgets.
Yeah, it can be a lot to handle. That's why the guide stresses strong leadership, clear communication. Everyone needs to be on the same page.
Easier said than done, I imagine, especially with something like urban planning. What other challenges are there?
Working with the community is another big one. It's important to include them, but it can also be tricky.
How so?
Well, not everyone will agree on everything. There might be different opinions on the design, concerns about construction disruptions, maybe even people who doubt the whole project.
So how do you deal with that?
The guide says to make community engagement an ongoing thing, not just a one-time meeting.
Oh, okay.
It's about being open and honest, listening to people, and being willing to adapt based on their feedback. It's about finding solutions that work for everyone.
It's a balancing act for sure, but I get why it's so important to have the community on board. After all, these projects are supposed to make their lives better.
Exactly. And that leads to another challenge the guide mentions, managing expectations.
What do you mean?
Well, these projects often come with big dreams and goals, but we have to be realistic. Things take time and money. We can't do everything at once.
So no overpromising, be upfront about what's possible.
Right. The guide highlights clear communication about timelines, budgets, potential problems. It's about keeping the community informed every step of the way.
We've covered a lot here, from the possibilities to the challenges. This Romanian guide sounds really thorough.
It really is. It doesn't pretend these projects are easy,
Yeah.
but it also stays positive. It's a call to action for Romanian cities to really go for it, to make their communities better for everyone.
I love that. It's not just a boring report, it's a vision for the future.
Exactly.
And speaking of the future, we have one more case study to look at. Let's go across the ocean to New York City. Are you ready for another adventure?
Always. What are we looking at?
We're going to dive into Hudson Yards, a project that took this whole rail revitalization idea to a whole new level. Get ready to be amazed. Okay, so Hudson Yards. My mind is still trying to grasp this whole idea of building a neighborhood on top of a working rail yard.
It's pretty wild, isn't it?
It's pretty amazing. It sounds almost futuristic.
It definitely pushes the limits. You know, you've seen pictures of those skyscrapers on Manhattan's West Side.
Right, those sleek, modern ones.
Those are Hudson Yards.
Wow, I had no idea. I always pictured it as this very, exclusive place. You know, high-end shops, expensive restaurants, but it sounds like there's more to it than that.
There is. A lot more than meets the eye. It does have those luxury elements.
Right.
But it's not just for the wealthy at its core. It's about taking something unused and turning it into a valuable part of the city.
Okay, that's what I wanted to hear. We talk about mixed-use development, but this is next level. It's not just a few shops. It's a whole neighborhood built from the ground up.
That's a great way to put it, and that vision is what makes Hudson Yards so interesting. They weren't just putting up buildings, they were creating a place where people could actually live their lives.
Okay, see, that's what I'm a little unsure about, the living there part.
Yeah.
With all those fancy shops, I imagine it's crazy expensive.
You're right, affordability is a huge issue, especially in New York City. And while there are those luxury apartments, they did include a good amount of affordable housing too.
Really? So they were thinking about everyone, not just the wealthy.
They were. They knew that a successful neighborhood needs a mix of people.
That makes me see it in a whole new light. It's not just about being flashy. It's about making a real difference.
Exactly. And that commitment to doing good goes for the environmental impact too.
Okay, tell me more about that. What did they do to make it sustainable?
Well, they did a lot. For one, they have their own microgrid, so they generate a lot of their own energy.
Wow.
They collect and reuse rainwater, so they're not using as much city water.
They really thought of everything, didn't they?
They did. And it wasn't just about the technology. They wanted to make it easy for people to get around without cars, so wide sidewalks, bike lanes, green spaces.
Putting TOD into action on a huge scale.
Exactly, and it seems to be working. People love going there, and it's easy to get to with public transit.
Hudson Yards is pretty inspiring. It shows what we can do when we rethink how we design our cities.
I agree.
It's about more than just those old rail lines. It's about building a better future.
Well said. And that's something that applies everywhere, not just New York City. This Romanian guide we've been talking about, it has that same message.
Yeah.
It's about encouraging cities all over the world to look at what they have, those underused spaces, and imagine the possibilities.
Those old tracks, those forgotten stations, they're not just things of the past.
Right.
They're chances to build something better.
Absolutely. And with a little creativity, some teamwork, and listening to the community, those chances, those possibilities, they can become reality.
I love that this whole deep dive has been so eye-opening. It's really changed how I see things.
I'm glad to hear that.
And, you know, for you, our listener, this is about more than just trains and stations. It's about creating communities that work for everyone, places that are thriving, green, and connected. It's about building the cities of the future, and that's something we can all be a part of. Thanks for joining us.